So we continue with the research gaps. So what we so far discussed about how we identify the research problem. So when we are trying to identify the research problem, we need to identify the gaps. Okay, so in a research context, there are 5 gaps. We already discussed in detail about the gaps, and I already told you that normally undergraduate levels, most of the students commonly engage with empirical gaps type research and implement and methodological gaps research. So, but we always expecting student to think out of box and try to do something regarding knowledge gap as well as the implementation gaps type research, because those are very important and that give value to the society as well as the scholarly world, because your findings are very important for us, for others to continue in their research process. Okay, so now we are going to discuss about some examples regarding the research problem. Okay, so I let you know some 2 examples given with the previous your senior batch, and then we will discuss about some articles and how to figure it out the research problem based on that article, right? Okay, so moving on. First we discuss some business problem and we try to convert it into the problem statement. I told you that the problem statement give brief description or give some details regarding what your study about, what is the purpose of your study. So it includes the research objective. That's why I told you, so objective means the purpose, why you are going to do it, right? What is your intention to do it? So all the details are including in the problem statement, right? So let's see this example. This is coming with the working from home concept, right? So now the problem I emphasize, or I explain in this way. The working at home is more and more of a hot topic because of how tight the marketplace is, right? Actually, this study is done before the COVID-19 pandemic, right? For the most part, cloud technology had made it easier than ever for remote workers to work from anywhere. So we know that if we are using this working from home concept, we can work from anywhere. We don't know whether we are at home, whether we are at some other places, whether we are at in our vehicle. We don't know, right? So everyone has a freedom to work at anywhere. So companies will do all sort of things to entice employees, that means motivate employees to, including offering flex time and work from home options. So work from home means we don't have a flexible time to work, right? Where whatever the time we like, we can work. But it depends on the organization policies and regulations. But commonly, that's the practice. So though remote work is such a new trend, there are plenty of arguments for it and not as many arguments against it from companies who have tried and failed. Now, even the people introduce it into the employees with the expecting much benefit from them. That means expecting more outcome from the employees, because the flexible time, the flexible workplace, and they can work from work home as well as do some their own family matters. Everything is there, right? But the thing is now the expected result of the organization are not coming. They are that not achieved. So then that is a problem, right? So that is a problem. Now, we know that the work from home having benefits. Now it has more challenges. That means it has more things that we need to consider why it is failed, right? Now, I told you that we cannot research everything. We cannot research the entire concept of work from home from the organization perspective as well as employee perspective. So we have to think about which area we are going to touch in your research study, right? So now look at the research objective. Now it says the purpose of this study is to discover the most prevalent challenges of working at home for employees as well as for companies. Now, they are trying to figure it out. What are the most prominent challenges, prevalent challenges for employees as well as companies? That means employers' perspective, right? So they try to find out the challenges. If we narrow down it more, as I told you earlier, right? If we narrow down it more, we can consider those challenges as technical challenges, right? Or else we can consider that family matters, right? Or psychological challenges, right? Or economical challenges, right? If we take challenges as common, or else we can narrow it down furthermore, like economical challenges, like psychological challenges, and so on, right? So it's up to you, right? It's up to you to decide which context you are going to study, right? So then, based on the research objective, right, we will teach you how to construct those things in your research proposal. So based on the research objective, you can develop your research questions, right? So those research questions are generated through your research problem, right? So our objective is to identify the prevalent challenges, most important challenges faced by the employees as well as employers when implementing work from home concept, right? So based on that purpose, we can identify 2 different research questions that we're going to address through your research study, right? So first question is, what are the challenges faced by employees when working at home? Right? So both of same objective, we now divided into 2 questions, right? And the other question is, what are the challenges faced by the companies when implementing work at home concept? Okay, so objective we put together, but in question we can make the separate section, or else we can divide like this, right? What are the economical challenges faced by employees when working at home? Right? If we take challenges as a broad perspective in your objective, right? Then we can ask separate questions. What are the economical challenges employees face? What are the psychological challenges employees face? What are the social challenges employees face? So what are the technological challenges employees face? You see, the objective is to identify the challenges, and those challenges we can divide it into different questions. But if you set your objective as to purpose of this study is to identify the most prevalent technological challenges of working at home for employees. Now we narrow down it to the technological challenges, right? Then you can ask the questions like, what are the technological connectivity challenges, right? What are the technological devices challenges, or what are the technological knowledge challenges, right? So then we make the question based on that objective. Okay, so I believe that you understand what I'm trying to say. Okay? So your problem is work from home concept. That is the problem. Okay, that is a problem. That is a researchable problem. Now that researchable problem we take it into the problem statement. So we need to convert it into the researchable management problem, right? So as I told you, we cannot study entire work from home concept, right? So we study the work from home concept with regard to the challenges. So those challenges, now we try, either you can convert those challenges into technological challenges, or we can convert as economical challenges, as we discussed earlier, or else we can consider the challenges as a common platform, right? So it's depend on you how far you can go in depth of the study, right? So that is the way you can convert the problem into the research objectives, and based on the research objective, you can convert it into the research questions, right? So you might be having the main objective, like we call it as a general objective, right? Or else we can convert it as a specific objectives, right? So in here you can say the general objective of this study is to investigate the most prevalent challenges of work at home, right? So based on that, you can say the specific objectives are identifying the technological challenges and identify the socio-economic challenges and identify the psychological challenges. Likewise, also you can do this, do that kind of separation on that research. Okay, so it depends on your interest as well as how far you can analyze in depth of the given problem or given management problem. So this is based on the work from home concept example. So likewise, you can think about your management problem and then you can convert it into the research objectives and then to the research questions. Right. So let's moving on the next example. Now, this is the example based on the aging population, right? So we discussed that example in our previous discussion. Okay, so I told you that now aging population getting matter for the developing countries, and this one specifically focus on South Asian countries, right? So in here it's give introduction that problem is described like this. So Sri Lanka aging population pattern is relatively high compared with other South Asian countries. So you need to give evidence to your statements once you are making that kind of things, right? So we cannot just say, as I believe, the Sri Lankan aging population pattern is relatively high compared to South Asian countries. But you have to prove that using either statistic or using some other scholar works. I will let you know how to do it, right? But for up to now, think about like that, right? So rapidly increasing aging population that Sri Lanka faces might create scarcity of young employees in the labor forces as the portion of the early rises. So over time, a large-scale withdrawal of experienced human capital would be seen as the elderly retired, further worsening the shortage of talent. Now, aging population has two things, right? When population getting age, that give less opportunity for young employees to getting employed because they still working, right? They still provide their labor forces to their commitment to the labor forces, right? And in the other way around, when the large scale withdrawal, that means when people are getting old, they try to retire, they try to stop their working. Okay, so then it also getting some consequences of human capital capacity, right? So in one way, the young people getting less employment opportunities. In other way around, the well-experienced people are getting retired from the position. So it also getting issue to the labor force. Okay. So you try to understand in here is we try to emphasize what is the problem first. Right? Always try to emphasize what is the problem. Now, aging population is not that problem if it is not having any consequences. So you have to explain what are the consequences of having aging population to the Sri Lankan economy with this kind of context, right? So it again says the population change in the future will eventually have dramatic effect on the country's economy as it influence on the size of labor force available. So it definitely directly affects the labor force availability. And endorsing long working life by encouraging retires back to the workforce has been encouraged by the many as a viable option to combat this issue, right? So in order to overcome the influence on the labor force, the experienced labor force, lacking of the experienced labor force, now countries are trying to get the retired labor force to the work again. That's what we call bridge employment. Okay, so now aging population getting issues to the society, as well as there are some options to overcome those issues. Okay, so in here it says, enduring longer working lives by encouraging retired back to the workforce has been encouraged by many as visible option to combat this issue. As one way to do is through bridge employment. Now we get the concept of bridge employment aligned with the aging population. You see the connection, right? So this flow is very important for you to understand. So this is why we call academic writing, right? You need to catch up this point. And it's very important. Okay, so it says the small stream of research in the bridge employment scope has examined the expectation of employees in engaging bridge employees and employees involved in bridge employment. So research has been done about this bridge employment, right? The expectation of employers in engaging the bridge employment and expectation of employees involving bridge employment. So those things are studied, but it's still lacking, right? So that's why this study, right? This study is going to examine the factors influencing bridge employment engagement in health sector in Sri Lanka. Now, the study, we are not going to address all the bridge employment things, right? We are not going to touch all the things in the bridge employment. We try to figure it out. We try to investigate what factors influencing that age population or retired employees to come back and work again, specifically in health sector in Sri Lanka. Right, so the student justify why he select health sector, because the health sector having the most severe influence of this retired employee, because we know that how much we spend for people who train in this health sector, specifically medical doctor and nurses, right? If they are retired continuously and their withdrawal rate, their retirement rate is high in near future, who are going to fill that lagoon, right? We have to spend a lot of money again. Right? So that's the thing we need to see from this research problem. Now it get in the management problem, right? So that management problem, now you convert it into your research purpose. Okay, understand? Right? This is the way you need to do. Right? So the study objective says to examine the factors influencing bridge employment engagement in health sector in Sri Lanka. Right, so this is the way we understand, we converted the problem into researchable problem, and we converted it into the problem statement, right? So this way, this one explain your problem, right? So it emphasizes about the aging population in Sri Lanka, and it implies what are the consequences of having aging population, as well as it gives some hint that some other countries and some other industries using this age population back to the work. We call it as a bridge employment. Now here we try to find out what factors influencing health employees to engage with bridge employment. Okay, you see, right? So based on the objective, you can define your research question. You can construct your research question. So it's very simple, right? So you can see that what are the factors that influencing bridge employment engagement in health sector employees in Sri Lanka. Okay, so that's the way. Right now, this is not a complex one, but the only thing is you need to understand the problem properly. Okay, so earlier I told you that aging population is a problem, right? It's a problem. So in here, in a problem statement, you need to emphasize how it becomes a problem to a country or sector or industry or as an organization. Right. This is the way I try to explain you how to write your research problem in a proper way. Right. So in the first time you couldn't do it. Right. This is a continuous training. Right. You need to read. You need to read a lot. Read and understanding the writing pattern of those articles, conference proceeding, textbooks, newspaper articles. Then make it as your own work. And we will let you know what is this meaning of your own work, because in a research there is a malpractice called plagiarism. That means you take some other works and put it as your document and emphasize that it is your work. That's wrong, right? So we need to acknowledge that work. We will discuss that later. But in here, what we can understand is you need to clearly explain what is your problem, right? What is your problem? Okay, that's what we try to do with this two small examples. These are very two small examples, right? So next I will explain you by reading an article how you can construct the research problem, right? Or how you can identify your research problem, right? And then you can develop your research objectives and your research questions, right? So there is no hard and fast rule that you need to have more than two objectives. You need to have at least 2-3 objectives, right? Even one objective is perfect, but it has to be very clear and it has to be very creative point in your research objective. So based on that objective, either you can develop one research question or you can develop 2 or 3 research questions. So it's up to you. And because you are the person who are doing it, not myself or Sachin sir, right? So you have to do, and you need to decide how many objectives I need to achieve and how many questions I'm going to address. And remember, those objectives are tally with questions, right? And the objective need to be tally with your research problem. Everything are in one line, right? Everything need to have a consistency. That's the important point, right? Okay, so shortly we will discuss about some article and I let you know how to do with the research problem, right? So before that, let me have one thing to explain you regarding why we need to conduct research. That's the last point I discussed within this session, right? Why we need to conduct research. I told you at the beginning of this session, if we identify a problem, always consider that who will get impact of this problem and who will get the benefit from this problem if we solve this problem, right? What are the consequences generate through this problem, right? Everything we need to see. If you remember our example, tea prepared at home and tea prepared at restaurant, right? Tea prepared at home doesn't make any significant impact to the third party or the society. It's only for your family matter. Then it is not a researchable problem, right? Then the tea at a restaurant, if it is not good, then definitely affect to their image. Then finally, ultimately, it's going to impact to their profit, right? Then it is a researchable problem. Why? It's an impact to a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders engaging with that industry. Okay, so then who get the benefit from your study? That's the important question you need to ask when you select your research question, right? So if you are doing with the company related issue, like employee turnover, like work from home concept, okay, and some small scale businesses, etc., what we discussed so far. So then the company management get the benefit. Right? If you identify the most challenges faced by the work from home concept in the employee's perspective, so company make some strategies to overcome those challenges. Right? And the policymakers, when you are trying to identify the survival strategies of small scale enterprises or small scale firms in during pandemic time periods, so policymakers consider about those strategies and make some good policy decision to enhance those strategies in other small scale businesses, right? So these are the things you need to think. And the government institutions, so government make some kind of strategical implementation based on the findings you have made, right? And the society, right? The entire benefit finally go to the society because we all are living in the one common society, right? And the individual wise. Okay, and for an example, if the government institution perspective, if we know about the aging population and bridge employment, so government can make a separate institution for the bridge employees, to handle the bridge employment matters, right? They might have a separate regulatory bodies to handle the bridge employment matters because bridge employees are now not included into our labor law, right? So then government institution can make that kind of necessary arrangements. And the society wise, right? If you consider about the small scale industry, their survival strategies, if you try to make some policy making and if you try to enhance those strategies with other small scale businesses, so society get benefit. Why? When the small scale businesses enhance their business opportunities, so others get employment opportunities, others get some other expand in the production line. Everything is there, right? And individual wise, when we consider about the challenges faced by employees while engaging with the work from home concept. So if we identify those challenges and if the organization puts some remedies to overcome those challenges, so individual employees get benefit from that, right? They are not anymore face the challenges. So therefore think, okay, don't make rush into deciding your research problem. Always think about who get the benefit from your study. So in your research proposal, we expecting that benefit as a significant of the study. You have to explain what are the significant points of conducting this study. So that significant indicate who get the benefit from your study, right? So I will show you all the examples about this, whatever the point I discussed so far, right? But you need to remember these very few things. When you are selecting your research problem, it has to be relevant to your study discipline, and it has to be flexible. That means you, first of all, you need to think about whether I can access with that problem, whether I can discuss that problem with the relevant parties. Do I have a permission to do it? Right? Think about those things. And then the third most important thing is it has to be interesting to you. Not your friend, not your parents, not your neighbors, not your teacher. Right? Even I said, no, you cannot do it, you have to do this one. You can say, no, this is my interesting area, so I like to do it. But when you are saying interesting area, you have to put some value to that interesting area. Right? So then it gives benefit to the others. So research is not a single benefit game. It has to be have multiple benefits, right? It's not only for you to get the credit of the subject, right? You need to give something to your society through your research. Think about that, right? Then you think about who get the benefit from my study. Is it the company management? Is it the policymakers in the country? Is it the government? Or is it the society as a whole and as an individual employees or individual consumers perspective? Right? Think about that. So that's the thing I want to discuss with you so far. And I will show you some kind of examples based on the article as well as some sample example for problem statement. Okay, I'll show you with this discussion regarding that. Then you will get clear understanding about what I say about this research problem. Okay. Right. Now let's focus your attention to this article. Right. This is the article I get through from Google Scholar account. Your Google Scholar, what I discussed with you in your practical session 1. Right. Now in here, the interesting research area is that I'm interested with e-commerce adoption of SMEs. Right. So my interesting field is technology. Right. Under the technology, I put it into the e-commerce. Right. So e-commerce coming under the technology. So e-commerce adoption, I put it as a specific area of the subject. So then I put e-commerce adoption. Right. So then I get this article. It's a very recent one, 2021. Right. So then I read it and I try to figure it out what it say about e-commerce adoption, specifically in SME sector, right? Small business sector. And this one is relevant with the Indonesia. So I like to find it out, how can I take it to Sri Lankan perspective, right? So that's why I told you every time, please consider about your interest area, interest subject. Then divide it into specific subject areas, like what I did in here. My interest area is, interest subject is information technology, and my specific subject area is e-commerce adoption or e-commerce. Forget about the adoption, right? E-commerce. Then once I put it into the Google Scholar account, then I come across with this article. Right? Once I'm reading the title, like what I did with the last session, right? Then I identify this one. Then I feel it gives something to me. Right? It's more interesting to read and whether I can get a similar kind of study as my research, right? Then I read, right? So I go into the abstract, then I read. So it says, the purpose of this study is to examine the dimensions of intramural orientation, knowledge management process, and dynamic capability towards adoption of electronic commerce of small and medium enterprises in Indonesia. Right? So once I search in electronic commerce, right? Now I ended up with 3 new things. Right? My initial idea is on e-commerce. Right? Once I read this article, I read this abstract, I come across with 3 different concepts. But it says entrepreneurial orientation and knowledge management process and dynamic capability. You see how our knowledge is going to enhance to one article. Right? Now, instead of now electronic commerce adoption, now I like to connect it with the entrepreneurial orientation, knowledge management, and dynamic capability. Right? But I don't say, I never say that we have to address all the things in our study. Right? So we can see that how knowledge management process can influence to adoption of electronic commerce in SMEs. That is a research. Right? That is a researchable things to do. Okay. Now this study trying to examine how entrepreneurial orientation, knowledge management, and dynamic capability influence to adopt electronic commerce of SMEs. Okay, so then it says we just read the purpose and we feel that it is interesting to read further. Then I can go further with introduction part. Right? I told you at our first session, if you feel that abstract is good, specifically purpose is good of the study, and you feel that it's new thing to do, we can add something to it. Right? Then you can read it. Now I highlighted some important points in here, then you can identify what is the problem that we are going to address through this study. Okay, so it says something in here also about the IT information technology, and in this highlighting point, that pink color highlighted point, it says e-commerce for SMEs has increasingly become an important platform and play a unique role by providing transaction without physically present or expanded demographical research, respond competitive pressure, and lower the operation cost. So it first emphasizes what are the benefits that SMEs can obtain through applying e-commerce. Through applying e-commerce. You see how we enter into the problem. Right? දැන් මෙතන ඔයගොල්ලෝ හරියට බලන්න ඕනේ අපි කොහොමද ප්‍රොබ්ලම් එකකට ඉස්සලම අපි කියන්නේ අවතීර්ණය වෙන්නේ. අපිට කෙලින්ම පොල්ලෙන් ගහලා වගේ කියන්න බෑ. This study is going to examine the how what are the factors influencing to adopt e-commerce technologies to SMEs. You cannot say like that, right? You have to explain the problem in a proper flow with the clear justifications, right? With the clear justification. This is what we call academic writing, right? This is what we call academic writing, right? Now, this is pink color one. It says the e-commerce for SMEs has increasingly become an important platform, right? So who says that? Is it me? No, I'm not saying that. It says by the scholars, right? So it says by the scholars. Those we call the prior studies who have done with the same field, who identify the importance of e-commerce into SMEs. Right? So these are the benefits. This is we call citation in research. The citation means we need to acknowledge who said that statement. Right? So based on these 3 studies, right? Now, this researcher, based on these 3 studies, emphasize that, based on these 3 studies, emphasize that e-commerce are very important for SMEs, right? And it gives some justification to that statement. So it expands its geographical reach, that means it expands the marketplaces, and it gives some competitive pressure to the competitors, and it lowers the operation cost. You see, but those things are generated through these 3 studies. That's why it says, right? So then it again says, right? Likewise, it gives some benefit. So you can read, right? I'm not reading on everything. Okay. So then it connects to the specific context. See, first it gives the overall picture about why e-commerce is important to SMEs, right? So then this one gives the overall picture about the importance of e-commerce to SMEs, right? Then it connects into the Indonesia, the specific context. If you are doing with the Sri Lankan context, now you have to connect it to the Sri Lanka. It says, meanwhile, in Indonesia, the number of users of e-commerce is tremendously increased, which estimated to contribute to the economic growth with the market value approximately $150 billion. Now it says that our country also utilizing this e-commerce platform. Our country is also utilizing the e-commerce platform. Okay, so it opened another door for e-commerce, and now coming to the Indonesian context, right? Then it says slowly, now it's connecting to the SMEs in Indonesia with e-commerce adoption, right? So it says SMEs in developing countries face challenges which are entirely different from those in developed countries, and differs generally adopting benefit from e-commerce. Now it says when compared to the developed countries, SMEs adopting e-commerce, so developing countries have another picture, right? So it says that the adoption of e-commerce in SMEs in developing countries are low. Okay, so then there is issues to address. Okay, you see, there is an issue to address. What is the issue? Now, developed countries SMEs are adopting e-commerce relative to the developing countries, right? So then that issue has to be addressed, and this study, it's going to be addressed through Indonesia. Why Indonesia? Because Indonesia is a developing country. You see, so this is the way you need to generate your research problem, right? So then it says something about SMEs in North Sumatra, that is one of the city in Indonesia, right? So then it says about the situation in the Indonesia and SMEs e-commerce adoption, right? So it emphasized that e-commerce adoption in Indonesia relatively low when compared with other developed countries. Okay, so this is the way you need to justify your research question, your research problem. Okay, so likewise it explains something things, and continuously it goes with the some kind of theoretical background of adoption of e-commerce, right? Adoption of e-commerce, right? It says the popular theory of e-commerce adoption is technological organization and environmental theory, right? It says when people are trying to find out what factors influence into the e-commerce adoption, the popular theory, like the motivation theory, right? Like a resource-based theory. So popular theory for e-commerce adoption is TOE theory, right? It's a TOE theory. But this study argued that TOE theory does not emphasize or does not concern about the user's ability, the user's perspective, right? So it highlighted some gaps in theory also, right? As an empirical gap, that means it says developed countries SMEs are using e-commerce relatively high to the developing countries, right? And it also says when we are looking at the adoption of e-commerce, the well-established theory is TOE. But theory does not consider about the factors that can be influenced to the individual perspective, and it also said as well as organization perspective, right? So therefore, they challenge the theory, right? And therefore this study justify to use resource-based theory by using internal resources to assess any decision to achieve better performance in the case of good decision to adopt e-commerce. So instead of going to TOE theory, now this study trying to find out how or what factors influencing SMEs in Indonesia to adopt e-commerce with regard to the resource-based theory. That means what kind of resource constraint they are facing when adopting to the e-commerce, right? So that is the main concern about the study, right? So it says this study aims to examine empirically relationship between entrepreneurial orientation, knowledge management, and dynamic capability towards e-commerce adoption. Right? So based on the resource-based theory, they identified three concepts. I told you in our discussion earlier also. So resource-based theory basically focusing on what type of resources that organization has. And it also challenged by the dynamic capabilities. Right? Now this study align those three things together and find out how SMEs in Indonesia adopt e-commerce and how these three concepts influence to adopt e-commerce in SMEs in Indonesia. Okay, so this is what we call research problem, right? So look at the way that problem introduced. That is what I need you to focus, not the study area, right? So it first emphasizes its main focus on e-commerce adoption. Not any other things, right? So they need to find out what are the factors influence into e-commerce adoption in SMEs in Indonesia, right? So they give justification why they focus in Indonesia, right? So it says, when compared to the developed countries adoption of e-commerce is higher. Right? So then we need to know about why adoption of e-commerce is low in developing countries. So then this study find to address that gap. That's a gap. Okay, so how they are going to address that gap? Right? They try to find out the factors influencing to adoption of e-commerce. Right? Instead of focusing all the factors, we know there are maybe so many factors, maybe 1,500 factors. But we cannot do all in our study, right? So instead of going all the things, this study focuses on only three factors. How they select that three factors? They challenge the common theory on e-commerce adoption. Right? They said that instead of going to TOE, that means technology, organization, and environmental theory, we are focusing on resource-based theory, right? Acknowledging the resource-based theory, they identified three factors that might be influenced to adoption of e-commerce in SMEs, right? That's why they come across with on entrepreneurial orientation, that is a resource. The knowledge management, that is a resource, and dynamic capabilities. That's the skill that SME should have. And how those three factors going to influence the adoption of e-commerce in SME. You see how we can generate research problem. Right? It's not a difficult task. The only thing is you need to have an interest to read, and you need to read it very carefully and find out what can I get from this study. Right? So can't we do this into our Sri Lankan SME sector? Yes, we can do. Right? Because our SME sector also, adoption of e-commerce is low. So you can find out some statistics through relevant parties. Okay, so then we need to find out what factors can be influence the Sri Lankan SMEs to adopt e-commerce. Okay, so instead of going that no, some kind of theories, we can go with some other new theories. We can combine like this study. Okay, so this is the art. That's why I told you, we can show you how to do it. We can show you what is the research and what is about it. But we cannot make you to do it because it's need to be come from your side, right? It has to be come from your side, right? So if you read this, you might not get the idea what I already got, right? So you have to read it in a creative way, right? Everything once you are reading, always think about what is the gap that I can address to this study, right? Then you put it into the Sri Lankan context or organization perspective, something like that. And this is the thing you need to do. Okay, so that's a simple way I can explain to you how to identify your research problem. So in your problem statement, you can explain about the benefit of e-commerce, and the adoption of e-commerce in SMEs are low in developing countries, right? The same like what we discuss in our aging population, right? You get the benefit of e-commerce, and you said the developing countries SMEs are less adopting to the e-commerce. Okay, then you generate the path, or you open the path about what is your study about. Then you say the purpose of this study is to investigate the factors influencing on the adoption of e-commerce in SMEs in Sri Lanka, right? We can narrow down it more, right? So like this study says, we can narrow it down to that 3 identified factors, right? We can narrow it down, but because based on the theoretical background, they identify these 3 narrative factors, right? Instead of going all the factors, we just focusing on 3. That's why I told you in research, we cannot do everything, right? So they identify with the entrepreneurial perspective, they identify with the knowledge management perspective and dynamic capability perspective, right? For your study, you can focus on either entrepreneurial orientation. So you need to find out how entrepreneurial orientation influence to adopt e-commerce in SMEs in Sri Lanka. That's good. Then here, then you have to emphasize why you focus on entrepreneurial orientation specifically. Remember that point also, right? So first you emphasize e-commerce adoption, and then it coming to the SMEs, and you emphasize there is a gap in SMEs e-commerce adoption in developing countries are low, right? So then you have to connect the entrepreneurial orientation and e-commerce adoption. Okay, otherwise you have to say these theories are emphasizing those are the factors highly influenced on e-commerce adoption in SMEs in developed countries. So in this study also, we are trying to find out whether those factors are influencing the SMEs e-commerce adoption in developing countries, right? Likewise, every time, everything you have to connect. Everything you have to connect. Okay, so that's we call academic writing. That's the way you need to emphasize your problem. Then you can say the purpose of this study or objective of this study is to identify the factors influencing the e-commerce adoption of SMEs in Sri Lanka. Or else you can say the factors in the sense of the, you can say that the objective of this study is to identify the influence of entrepreneurial orientation on the e-commerce adoption of SMEs in Sri Lanka, right? So that's the way you can do. Then the research question you can ask, what is the influence of entrepreneurial orientation on e-commerce adoption of SMEs in Sri Lanka? Or you can ask, what are the factors influencing to adopt e-commerce of SMEs in Sri Lanka? right? So remember, you have to emphasize the adoption of e-commerce as your important concept. Okay, so you have to give weight to that concept. Then the factors, either you can go with the common factors, or you can go with the theoretical ways, or you can select some 2-3 factors. Right? So this is the way you need to write your research problem. So I believe that now you are having some kind of considerable understanding about what is this research problem and how you can generate your research problem based on the prior studies. Right? So therefore, as I mentioned you in the practical session, first think about your interesting subject like information technology. Think about your specific subject area like e-commerce, right? Then search it through Google and Google Scholar and find it out most recent articles published relevant to that area. In my case, e-commerce, right? Then read 1 or 2 articles abstract. If you feel that those are important, as those are give some new thing you to think, right? Then read the introduction and find it out what is the gap or what are the gaps that you can address through your study based on that article. So I need you to do it very committed way. So please do it, and then we will see what we can do with your research proposal introduction chapter. Right? I explain you all the important things in your research proposal, but don't worry, right? Now don't get rushed because we have time. I need you to strong enough. I need you to feel comfortable with your problem area. Right? Therefore, spend 1 or 2 weeks to figure it out, your comfortable research area. And write a draft about your research problem, like what I show you in this slide. Okay, like this. So you just need to emphasize this. Okay, so let's do it in a effective way, and we will see how good you are with your research work, right? So Sachin sir will help you with the tutorial classes how to modify your research problem, right? And then next practical session, I will explain a little bit more about this kind of article and show you how to find out your research problem in this manner. Okay then, so see you next time with more examples. Have a good day to you all.